Hi, I'm Barbara Rimkunis, and this is your Exeter History Minute. If you spent any time this Memorial Day wandering through the town's cemeteries, that's perfectly okay to do that. They are places of remembrance. You've probably become curious about the graves of those who died in service. Before we get to the family I'd like to highlight, here's just a bit about Exeter cemeteries. There are two main cemeteries in town. The Exeter Cemetery on Linden Street, which opened in the 1840s and seen here decorated for Memorial Day, was laid out during a time period when cemeteries were designed to be park-like. There are pathways set up for strolling, and people were even encouraged to maybe have picnics there. In comparison, the Winter Street Cemetery on the corner of Front Street and Winter Street was placed on land donated by Colonel John Gilman back in 1738. The burials can look very untidy, and there are a lot of unmarked graves. Records for this cemetery are a bit sketchy. We sometimes have a hard time confirming whether someone's ancestors are interred there at all, which drives genealogists a bit nuts. We're sorry about that. There are also some small family burial grounds scattered all around town. That is a story for another History Minute. The reason I'm bringing all of this up is because there are two very curious burials in the Winter Street Cemetery, those of the brothers John and George Van Duzee. The first oddity, at least for Exeter, is the family name. Van Duzee is a very Dutch name that wouldn't have seemed out of place in, say, New York, but for New England, which didn't have much of a Dutch presence and still doesn't, the Van Duzee family stands out. The father in this story, George Van Duzee, was from Elmira, New York. He worked as a tailor, and this seems to be what brought him to Exeter, where he met and married Deborah Colcord in 1835. The family then moved briefly to Pittsfield, New Hampshire, where the younger George was born. They moved to Woodstock, Vermont after that, and 3 more children were born, Mary, John, and Orville. But some marriages just don't work out. Deborah returned to Exeter in 1855 and filed for divorce. She stayed in town with her children, surrounded by her own family, the Colcords, for the remainder of her life. When the Civil War broke out, her 2 eldest sons enlisted in 1862. John, who was 18, enlisted first, followed quickly by his 25-year-old elder brother, George. Did Deborah send George down to the enlistment office to keep an eye on John? Wouldn't have been unheard of. They both served with the New Hampshire 13th Regiment, Company E, with Exeter's Captain George Julian. George Van Duzee was killed at Cold Harbor in July of 1864. John was discharged disabled due to illness in January of 1865. He made his way back to Exeter, where he died the following July. It was a tragic loss for their mother and remaining siblings. The high cost of war hurts us all. Losing 2 of her 4 children must have been devastating for Deborah. Their local burial would have been an added burden. Although the cemetery on Linden Street was open, she chose instead to have her sons interred in the old Winter Street Cemetery with her Colcord relatives. It must have also taken a bit of convincing to get the town to give permission. The graves seemed slightly out of place among the older stones. Neither of these young men were born in Exeter, but their family roots run deep in town, and their final resting place is perfectly appropriate. I'd like to thank Richard Cole for help with this research for this episode. And for more Exeter history, check out our website at www.exeterhistory.org.